So version 3 Cyrene was released a bit ago and she got a lot of changes. Now the question is, with these buffs and changes, is she now worth your pulls? And what teams does she realistically buff? While there's still 2 versions down the line, with version 4 coming soon, everything still should be applicable. Now to keep stuff simple, today's video is divided into 3 main parts. We'll first look at her base buffs and performance to understand where she compares to the other supports. So say she has Robin level buffs at a baseline, then you can get a decent understanding of her strength without the Chrysos Heirs buffs. Next, we'll break down her performance with each of the Chrysos Heirs and go over her pull value, and also explain the Chrysos Heirs pull path. This section is where you can find whether or not you should replace Tribbie or Evernight with Cyrene. And lastly, we'll analyze and go over a core issue, which after my research, I found that the issue is blown out of proportion, which is something I didn't expect at all. With that said, let's get into part 1. Firstly, let's see what she provides to the team in regards to raw amp. Is she close to tier 0 levels even without her unique buffs? Well, her skill provides 24 true damage, while Trace 3 and her talent gives 40 damage percent. With her Memo Sprite skill, you either get an additional 40 damage bonus for non-Chrysos Heirs or a unique buff per Chrysos Heir. Now, when compared to Ruan Mei, who provides 25 res pen, 78 damage bonus, and 10 speed, everything is pretty equivalent outside of the 10 speed. With this information, from a numbers perspective, she is at the level of Ruan Mei outside of her Chrysos Heirs team, but she gives less utility compared to Ruan Mei due to the speed and also break efficiency. Of course, in a Chrysos Heirs team, lose that 40 damage bonus but get unique buffs. So power level wise, without her ult and unique buffs, she's just a bit worse than Ruan Mei, and honestly, that's actually pretty good, as the unique buffs will be where a majority of the amp is from. Now, you may be like, why don't you compare with Tribbie, who's the new meta support? Well, it's because Tribbie gives less of an amp than Ruan Mei, but it's actually good for us, as amp-wise, a 40% damage bonus Cyrene is giving similar amp to Tribbie. By the way, this is also a solo support scenario, so if there are pre-existing self and external buffs, Tribbie would of course pull ahead. Now, the conclusion that we can draw from this is that 1. Even when Cyrene has not ulted, she still is providing a decent amp, and 2. She unironically functions okay outside of a Chrysos Heirs team. However, I will say it's not worth it due to the pre-existing options and also her lack of synergy. With that said, she does do what's required as a support, even when missing literally half her kit. So let's see if the unique buffs push her into a must pull. Now, before moving on to the next part, let's take a look at my chart. Here, we can see the power level of a normal support like Ruan Mei. When compared to Cyrene, her amp isn't insane nor is it negligible, so she's currently like the green line. That said, it would mean that generally, we do lose a good bit of damage because of the backloaded amp. So the question then becomes, how good is her buffs and synergy, and is it good enough to pull over other supports? So let's move on to section 2 to find out. Before I start, I want to say you should not be pulling a support to amp other supports, okay? So I'm strictly looking at how she performs for the DPS Chrysos Heirs. With that said, let's start with Aglaea, who's a Memo Sprite user, which lets her charge Cyrene fairly decently. At the same time, Cyrene's buffs are fantastic for someone like Aglaea, keeping her energy and other useful stats. When it comes to amping supports, only Sunday gives energy, meaning Cyrene is actually super valuable. So, how does the performance go? Well, after watching a lot of gameplay, it's actually really freaking strong. Using Sunday, you generally will get Cyrene's first ult in 150 to 180 AV, so either at the end of your second rotation or the start of your third. Now, I will further elaborate on this later as we figure out everyone else's, but just know it's actually really solid. For reference, a Von Whack Robin who cannot instantly ult takes around 140 action value, so again, not bad at all. As for the stack generation and repeated ults, generally speaking, we're looking at 8 to 10 Cyrene stacks every rotation without Hysilens, and if you had Hysilens in there, you could be getting 12 Cyrene stacks every rotation, so an additional 70 energy every time. And that's not to mention the buffs which have a 100% uptime assuming you play it well. Oh, did I mention how she provides Aglaea a bigger amp than Sunday, the current highest amping support in the game? Oh, and how she gives the same energy at nearly double the rate compared to Sunday? Yeah, it's a super disgusting combo, and I would say it's absolutely worth pulling for Aglaea. You do have a delayed amp, but afterwards, you just have insane buffs and damage, not to mention the perma ult uptime from the energy. The current alternative is just Robin, whose ult is similar in mechanic to Cyrene, and each have their own pros and cons. But I would say that Cyrene is worth upgrading to if you have a chance or don't have a good second support. Now, moving to Aglaea's pull path, Sunday is simply a must with or without Cyrene. After that, you can go the Robin route and pick up Ho-Ho, or you can go the Cyrene route with any sustain, preferably Hysilens, though Dianheng PT works just fine. There's also a third option for Aglaea where you can just get E1 and choose whatever supports you want. Next up is Mydei, whose unique buff got 20 more crit damage in version 3. There's also this new useless passive, but oh well. Regardless, let's see how she interacts with Mydei. Compared to Aglaea, who has a Memo Sprite, Mydei has no such thing. So in terms of synergy, there's literally zero, as she doesn't help drain nor does he help charge. So all Cyrene provides is her buffs and now the enhanced Godslayer every so often. So how's his performance? Well, because of the harsh stack requirement, you basically need to play using Hysilens or use RMC as the other support. So there's three main viable team comps. You can either go with Hysilens with RMC for the fastest charge, or use at least one of them and flex the other slot. All three options are just fine and similar to Aglaea, nearing around 150 to 180 action value for the first ult, which as I said prior is not bad at all. So how does the performance go? Well, it's actually really solid as well and also now his best in slot team, although you need either a RMC or Hysilens to make it work well. Now, because it's either 2 or 3 Amphoreus characters, the synergy on that team is very strong. Now, when compared to Tribbie, his current best in slot second support, number-wise it should be similar to Cyrene as mentioned prior. The main difference is that Tribbie has the advantage of Dance 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 or E1, while Cyrene gives extra enhanced Godslayers around every other rotation. So while it's relatively close, I would say that Cyrene's Remembrance team will pull out on top. As for his pull path, I would say if you want to play with Cyrene, you firstly need RMC, and ideally you pull Hysilens next. But if you want to use Cyrene with Sunday, Hysilens would be a must pull, and Cyrene's ult is also a bit delayed. And lastly, you have his traditional path with one of the Universal Ampers and Sunday, or even two. Next up, we have Castorice and also Evernight. Now, because the full Remembrance team has really good synergy with Cyrene, I won't explain the interactions and synergy as I assume you already know why. You know, HP scalers, Mono Amphoreus, and Remembrance? Yeah. Just know you should be getting your ult near the start of your second rotation or around 100 AV, in both dual DPS as well as hypercarry. Now, I want to use this time to go over the buffs instead, because one's pretty good and the other one is literally a damage loss. Starting with the poopy one, we have Castorice. Here, New Bud Overflow grants an additional multiplier based on how many enemies there are, and a 200% breath sounds pretty great. But isn't 2 100 breaths literally the same thing? Yep. Now, looking at my chart comparing the two scenarios, we can see that besides the single target scenario, a 200% breath is a damage loss in every other situation compared to just using 2 breaths. The only saving grace is that you're now getting an ever so slight increase in the bounce multiplier because you generally may overflow to something like 110 New Bud when casting Castorice's ult. Not to mention, in version 3, they added a stipulation which doesn't reduce the enemy count if you manage to overkill during the breaths. So please Hoyo, change or rework this cause it's dookie. Now, while this is the case, it doesn't change the fact how Cyrene currently performs ever so slightly better than Tribbie in that slot, which may or may not be surprising. On the other hand, we have Evernight, who got a further buff in version 3. While she lost 30 damage bonus, her skill's crit damage buff got buffed, and now further increases the crit by 12%. This is just a team-wide 30 to 42 crit damage buff, which is well worth the 30 damage bonus for one character. With that said, let's move on to the pull path because I know you're probably curious. do I pull Castorice, Tribbie, Evernight, or Cyrene? Well, firstly, Castorice needs Hysilens because of sustain issues, while Evernight really wants Hysilens because of the damage increase. As such, I would recommend if you want to use Remembrance DPSs, Hysilens will be the priority pull. For the first and most optimal team variation, we're going Castorice, who again needs Hysilens, and then Evernight as the core. Then the last slot is just an open support slot. If you don't like dual DPS for some reason, you can just go with Hysilens, with the other 3 supports being pretty interchangeable, with the strengths being close but likely in this order. Tribbie and Cyrene for the most part are still pretty interchangeable. While Cyrene generally performs a bit better post version 3, it's still pretty close. As for E1, pre-version 3, E1 Tribbie was better, but now I would say E1 Cyrene is on par with Tribbie. Now, if you're planning for vertical investment, I would highly recommend getting Evernights and then Castorice Eidolons. Evernights are just beyond broken, and E2 Castorice is very damn strong. E1 Tribbie, depending on the scenario, is better than Evernights and Castorice E2, as absorbing the overkill damage with a team that constantly wastes damage is just so OP. As for Lycones, from my own testing, it seems that Hysilens Lycone is unfortunately the most important of the 3, then Evernight, and lastly Castorice is. More new bud, Memori, and also vulnerability packaged in one Lycone. After that, we have Anaxa. Anaxa, like Mydei, has no synergy, so we're just here for the buffs, which are really strong. However, this was nerfed in version 3 with how the action advance works. Prior to version 3, if you Cyrene ulted on Anaxa's turn, it'll buff his current turn as well his next turn, where you double dipped on buffs. Multiplier alone, it was a 60% damage increase, and you pair that with 60% attack and 40 damage bonus, you basically shot 8 times in those 2 turns. So yeah, it was pretty insane. If you need another example of what this meant, just imagine you ulted with Robin on Anaxa's turn, and he still kept 2 turns. Now, you can't buffer the action advance anymore, so you would have to play it like a -1 setup Bronya or Sunday, casting Cyrene's ult right after Anaxa's skills. But basically, you're now shooting 6 shots during that time instead of 8. Now, even with the nerf, it's still very strong. An important thing to note is that the Ceredra synergy is still there. Ceredra's buff never amped more than 2 shots, so nothing changed in that department. The main thing would be that the timing is stricter because you can no longer buffer his turn. As for the erudition buff, it's fine, but it's not really useful as Tribbie is already best in slot for that team. So while you could make it work, Tribbie is just a better option. As for gameplay, if you decide to pull Cyrene, you're basically locked into 2 teams. Anaxa Cyrene Ceredra, and either Danheng PT or Hysilens, or Sustainless, likely RMC. Now, because of Danheng's and Ceredra's initial skill cast from their technique and 3 Amphorius characters, you can actually get all 24 core flames within the 0 cycle if you also do some funny business. Cyrene must be 200 speed so she gets to act 3 times in the 0 cycle. Doing so, you can time Ceredra and Danheng's ult right after she goes her 3rd time to get 24 core flames. Yeah, it's really cool and lets you do some 0 cycle stuff after the refawns. And like the other Chrysos Heirs, he generally takes around 150 to 180 AV to get Cyrene's first ult. Now, assuming Ceredra stays because she's best in slot, we're now just comparing Cyrene to Sunday. TLDR, while Sunday gives a consistent buff and action advance, making you shoot 2 more times when you do, Cyrene's advance is less frequent, but you make it up by shooting 2 extra times due to Cyrene's amp. So yeah, I would say it's a slight upgrade when compared to Sunday from what I've seen. Being able to overlap Cyrene's and Ceredra's buff is just really dang strong. So in regards to his pull path, we of course have his traditional team of an action advancer and support. But if you want a slight upgrade, you can go with Cyrene, but you need Ceredra in either an Amphorius Sustain or RMC. So while you can pull Cyrene for an upgrade, I would say it's not too worth, but still an upgrade nonetheless. Next up, we have Phainon. His unique buff was slightly improved in version 3, where he now gets 36 crit damage per E6 and extra scourge stacks after he blows up. There was a nerf to his additional damage aspect, but it's fire damage, so it's already kinda meh. Regardless, version 3's changes don't really change his performance with Cyrene. Now, like Anaxa, if you decide to pull Cyrene for Phainon, you're also basically locked to a few teams. The most prevalent team would be Phainon, Ceredra, Cyrene, and Danheng PT. By the way, Ceredra is needed to make this team worth using. With this setup, like Anaxa, you will be able to Cyrene at the end of your second rotation, so roughly 150 action value. However, if you decide to go sustainless with Cyrene, Ceredra, and RMC, you can achieve a Cyrene ult at around 60 to 70 AV, which allows for 2 Phainon actions in the 0 cycle. Now, from all the gameplay that I've watched, Sunday and Cyrene have nearly identical performances, clearing at near the same AV regardless of the investment level. The main difference now would just be the preference of gameplay. If you're okay with blowing up Phainon and having to do your team rotation a few times, then Sunday works just fine. If you however want Phainon to be in perma form, then you can get Cyrene. Again, it's literally just a preference at this point. However, when it comes to low cycle clears, then Sunday's comp does come out on top as Phainon can ult during the first rotation. But if you're going to stainless, then again, similar performance. I want to quickly address the self-burn from the unique buff. Generally speaking, it shouldn't be an issue as Phainon heals max HP while the burn consumes current HP. It will make his sustain a bit more difficult, but it'll really just depend on the enemy. That said, what are his team options and pull path? Well, if you want to use Cyrene, you better have Ceredra, or it's just not worth it. The double meatballs in his extended form is just too valuable as you're going to be stuck in there for a while. After that, you have the option of either Danheng PT or Sustainless. So yeah, pretty similar to Anaxa. Of course, he has his normal team comp, which uses a combination of supports like Sunday, Bronya, Ceredra, or Tingyun. Now to just sum up everything, get Ceredra for Phainon, and then you can choose between Cyrene and Sunday, as at that point, it doesn't matter. And last up, we have Hysilens, who gets a really strong buff. Self-detonation, damage bonus, and more energy for more ults. However, is it worth replacing someone like Black Swan? Now, because she needs a non-Emporeus character like Kafka, Cyrene's Trace 2 is not at its full potential. As such, if you go Danheng PT, it will take the start of your third rotation to ult. Well, if you have Hysilens, you can get it at the end of your second. Now, unlike Anaxa, Phainon, or Mydei, it honestly doesn't matter when you get it because you still can't act until your third rotation. The other three, due to their mechanics, are able to burst down the first wave, while Hysilens still needs to attack. Performance-wise, well, there's only one character to compare to, and that's Black Swan. At E0S0, Cyrene outperforms ever so slightly better. As a trade-off though, the team now becomes very SP negative. So while it's slightly better, is it worth investing into? I'd say no. Remember that Black Swan is an older character who has the potential to be buffed pretty soon. So if you pull Cyrene now, who's just barely better than Black Swan, what happens when Black Swan gets the Kafka treatment? It's because of that reason I'm not going to go into the pull path because I just recommend against it. And yeah, that's all of the different DPSs with Cyrene. For a quick TLDR, we can just look at my tier list. Mydei and Aglaea benefit from Cyrene the most, while Castorice and Evernight gain a new competitive support. For Anaxa, Hysilens, and Phainon, I would say it's just not really worth it if you already have a good team. Now, after going through all of that, let's round off the video by talking about what we've learned and break down the core issue which most people are currently fixated on. Before that, here's a summary of our base kit changes on the screen. TLDR, not impactful to where it would influence your pull priority. Back to their previous point though, the complaint is simple. 24 Recollection is a lot and difficult to reach, basically breaking your character. And I would actually disagree with the sentiment. Now initially when making this video, I felt the same way with how our kit currently works. It would in theory take 3 to 4 rotations to get Cyrene's first ult, which generally would range from 220 to 300 action value. By that time, the 0 cycle in Anomaly Arbitration would have nearly ended. or you'd be at the start of your second cycle in MOC. But in reality, every single Chrysos Heirs team can get Cyrene's ult at 150 to 180 action value, or a rotation sooner if you decide to go sustainless with RMC. And that's not bad at all for the value that she provides. Currently speaking, for general play, she's just not made for 0 cycle clears. 150 action value is just simply too long for most teams. However, Cyrene currently is great for anything outside of that. Remember, her buffs and what she provides are generally top tier, making her the best in slot for most of the Chrysos Heirs. So for any sustained battles, her amp is just simply more than her competition. Of course, you can go sustainless or E2 if you really want a 0 cycle. As for if she's worth or not, it will really just depend on your playstyle. If you want a 0 cycle or just have low AV clears, then the answer is no. But for most normal players who clear in 2 to 5 cycles anyway, she is an upgrade and is worth it for half of the Chrysos Heirs. And it's because of this that I would say her quote-unquote core issue is a bit overblown. Now, unlike people who are asking to put her E2 in her base kit, which is unrealistic in my opinion, the simplest thing to do is to just buff her traits too. If they increase the initial recollection gain by 3, then it eases up on the memo sprite or Amphorius character requirement while still keeping her as a backloaded amp. And I think it's really well balanced right now for having best in slot buffs. You do need to play around it and adjust your team to do so, but I think it's pretty fair for that immense boost. That said, she's literally best in slot currently for 6 out of the 7 Chrysos Heirs DPS, while only worth for 4, which is really crazy considering how people are doom posting about her performance. Now, I really don't see any nerfs coming to her kit as she's already in a pretty balanced spot. So, if they do decide to buff her in version 4 or 5, then yeah, she becomes a must pull. As for her character and in terms of balance, it's actually really good. We're buffing Mydei and Aglaea, 2 Amphorius characters that have gotten barely any love. As for the OP Remembrance game, which is the strongest team currently by a mile, she's just a bit better than Tribbie, so not really power creep. And as for the other 3 top DPSs, it's meh, it works. So for the people that have been complaining about power creep, yeah, Cyrene did a fantastic job in this department. And yeah, that's the whole video. I hope it was informative and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any suggestions for my video or its format, I'd also love to know too. I will have a pinned comment for any important information or updates, so do keep your eyes open. And besides that, I just want to say thank you for watching and peace.